good sis.
Jess, we're live,
Oh,
Yeah.
folks.
welcome.
We're here with the novelist, the basketball player,
The handsomest man in Spokane.
Wow.
the
that
devilishly
short
handsome.
bar.
Yeah, you got Alan, Steve.
We're here with Jess Walter. Jess, we're so stoked to chat with you a little bit. We got a lot to cover, but how you been?
I've been well, thank
Yeah.
you.
Good,
Yeah.
good, man. You hanging out pretty all right during the pandy. I feel like this is just right up your alley.
Yeah, it's no working at home by yourself. I'm on year 25 of it. So I used to go out every day for second breakfast. So that's been the hard thing is finding places that'll serve me breakfast outdoors. But yeah, I usually write 6 in the morning, 5 in the morning till 10, and then I go play basketball, have second breakfast, and then go work a little more in the afternoon. So yeah, the pandemic feels like writer time to me.
Yeah, me and Julian, we're in the means of starting a restaurant called Second Breakfast.
Are you?
Yeah.
And 11sies? I'll be there.
11Cs.
Yeah, I am in.
Yeah, cool.
Epic, man. When you voice your own audio book, or excuse me, your book, do you take on character voices? Are you one of those?
I definitely do. It's hard though. I mean, and so you have a script and it takes like a week and you're sitting there staring and you're thinking, what did I make this person sound like? And I really don't do that many voices. I do Sean Connery.
Oh,
Come on.
Come
No
on.
thanks, I'm waiting for someone. And that's it.
I'm blush dragon.
And you can't, if you're reading about meeting these stoner kids in a 7-Eleven, you can't really lapse into, would you like some weed, Mr.
Yeah,
Johnson?
yeah.
You know, it just
You
doesn't-
did a great job though, man. I'm not lying.
For an author, they were like, if the next novel hadn't had all this Italian in it and Richard Burton, they probably
totally.
would have had me read it. But it was, I've done a couple of other like short stories and novellas and things that people publish. So yeah.
Does it interest you to kind of get into those roles and act them out? Like you said, you kind of wish that you had the right to be the voice on a lot of these things, but they don't let you because you're not an actor. But do you enjoy that? Do you?
I always wonder what it's like for a musician to hear a cover. Hear someone covering your music.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like that. It's like when someone else would read my books, I'd be like, it's not supposed to sound like that. Whether it's better or worse, it's
Right.
just
different.
Yeah, and I always say it's like watching video of someone making out with your wife.
Yeah.
No matter how good their technique, you're going to be. That's not how it's done. So it can be hard to hear someone else read your work because you didn't hear it that way.
Right.
It's not that it's right or wrong. It's just that's not how you always heard it when you were creating it. So I do find being not really non-musical, I find so many parallels to the way musicians work. Dan Spaulding, I'll talk about this all the time. Just those, being loose or being tight, being open, it really, and that's one with, I always think when I hear a great cover, I'll think, I wonder if that hurts the author or hurts the musician to hear their work interpreted, not better, but in a way that they didn't hear it.
Of those three things, I would rate them as worst being watching somebody else make out with your wife,
Yeah.
hearing somebody else read your entire book,
Right.
and then the last one being somebody
Yeah.
cover your song because it takes 3 minutes.
That's true.
You're there for 3 minutes, and then you're just like, well, whatever. I'm on to the next thing.
Yeah.
A whole book. I mean, how long does it take you to write? I know some books of yours have taken. What is it?
15 years,
15
you said?
years.
Yeah,
Ruins.
Beautiful Ruins, and it's funny when you say it took 15 years because that really means you didn't get it for 14 years. You couldn't solve it, So I finished a draft in about 2008 or 2009, and then read it and said, I don't quite have it, and then I loved it enough by then that I wanted to nail it. So then I would just write something else. So, but yeah, you have to sort of let it loose out into the world too. And so part of that is listening. So I did listen to Edoardo Ballerini read Beautiful Ruins, and he did an amazing job. But usually when I would hear someone, they would, often with actors, especially when they would do audiobooks, I would feel like they would over-emote. Honey, I'm home. Where have you been? It's like, my people don't talk like that. They would just say, hey, I'm home, And so that's the hard thing is I would hear, people who I thought maybe had been fired from a soap opera, reading the work.
Right.
But
It would
Eduardo,
be me.
who I loved his work, he was on The Sopranos. He was Corky on The Sopranos.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
And he's on, he's a great actor. And then, just what he was able to do with the Italian, the way it sounds so musical. And then I was really sold when I heard his Richard Burton, because Richard Burton's a character in Beautiful Ruins, and to be able to get that, just the Welshness in his British accent.
So when you're creating an audiobook and your publisher says we're going to put this out on audiobook, first and foremost, do you audition the voice actors, and do you audition them in every single language that the audiobook comes out in?
I mean, audiobooks are mostly an American and British thing. So it's almost, and as with almost everything in other countries, they speak English. They take 2 or 3 languages. So my Italian fans have listened to Beautiful Ruins in English. But they'll typically, so when a book comes out, they sell the audio rights, and most authors will say, I'd love to have a chance, and they almost always say no. And then they give you 5 or 6 different actors, and you can listen to some of their audio work. You aren't really the one auditioning them; it's really the publisher. But they do have give you a say in it. So my new novel, The Cold Millions, they're doing a cast production. So there are like 9 different actors reading different parts. It'll be more like a play. So I'm really excited to hear that, which I was really glad for. They're Native American characters, so they hired Gary Farmer, terrific. I think he's Blackfeet Tribe in Montana actor to portray that, and so that feels a little more like casting. And so I'll be really curious to hear how that one comes out.
We were reading up. You had a front spread in the Inlander. Check out the handsome man, Mr. Jesse Waltz, baby.
Such a
Check
handsome
me
man.
out, dude. I like that. How many different places did the photographer go?
That one was pretty quick. I had a photo shoot this morning where it's like, work with me, and leaning forward.
Yeah.
But that was just kind of meet me at the river and snap a photo. And that
handsome man right there.
Yeah, man.
We were kind of digging into this, and I didn't know anything about your new novel.
Yeah.
I knew that you were writing it, but I didn't know the premise. I'm real excited about
Thanks.
that.
Yeah, it was really cool. Like just burrowing into that period. It's cool to be out here in a 1902 former roadhouse, speakeasy, dance hall like this place was. I mean, the period I'm writing about, you would have taken the streetcar out from Spokane, gotten off here, taken a boat across, and there would be people dancing Gatsby style on the water. I mean, one of the things that made me want to write about that period was looking at these postcards of packed downtown Spokane. It was the theater capital of the West next to San Francisco. This was this Spokane was doubling in size every 6 or 7 years. All of that wealth. If you think about the internet, the railroad in 1909 was the internet times 5. And this was, you're coming west, you want to get things to East Coast to West Coast to Seattle, Portland to LA. You're pretty much going south or you're coming north. And all of these rail lines came together in Spokane. That's why we still have trains everywhere. And then they spread out. One went to Portland, one went to Vancouver, 7 main rail lines. And so this was amazing wealth, also because that amazing poverty. And that's what the novel is really about, is this other moment in history that feels like, to me it does now, with civil unrest, with class and race issues, causing people to finally stand up for their rights, and with all of the wealth landed at the very top of the pyramid with the wealthiest Americans. We're at the moment in history now that it has the highest income inequality since 1909, the period I decided to write about.
Wow, man.
When did you start deciding to write this book?
I'll get these ideas and I'll stow little bits. It's like, being a writer is a little like being a magpie. You're just flying around looking for little bits of garbage, and you take them and throw them in a drawer. And it's like, what are you going to do with that Baby Ruth wrapper? You know, and you're going to build a nest eventually. So I started thinking about this novel back when I was a newspaper reporter, and I came across the free speech riots of 1909. 500 people thrown in jail just for standing on the street, singing and talking and protesting the fact that you had to pay $1 to get a job with these job agencies. And I just always thought, wait, my town was the center of progressive action in some period. And so that was the first impulse. And then I would collect all these different ideas and details about it and throw them aside. And so right around probably 13 or 14, I dove back into this idea, and I had another novel, a kind of more contemporary, funny, more like the Financial Lives of the Poets. So I sort of go back and forth with those ideas until something just grips me. And the other thing I kind of wanted to do, since I was writing about that period, I've never written anything that's sort of like a Western. And because this was about the way violence begets civilization, the way Spokane was nothing, didn't exist, and then 40 years later is 100,000 people, I thought, I want to write this almost so it feels like a Western, like those forces, that, I always thought of it as like Deadwood, but with 100,000 people.
Yeah.
I want to tell Deadwood, but with 100,000 people.
Sweet.
And then the real life character who came to Spokane, who led the free speech movement in 1909, was this 19-year-old pregnant activist from New York named Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, who is so incredibly courageous. 10 years before women have the right to vote, she's on the street corner with these hobos and transients fighting against corrupt police and officials, to get basic rights. 500 of them arrested. And it was really her actions that kind of, in a totally peaceful, nonviolent protest, one of the first in American history, she defeats, these forces. And so I thought, what if you write a Western, and instead of the stranger who rides into town being Clint Eastwood, what if it's a pregnant 19-year-old?
She's the protagonist of the whole story.
Yeah. Well, she's actually not. I realized I wanted her to be, sort of the mysterious figure who rides in. So it's really these two brothers, two Irish brothers from Montana, Gig and Rye Dolan. Who are, my grandpa was a hobo who hopped the rails in the 30s. And so I wanted two characters who kind of had that romantic side of being an itinerant worker. So, so that's the sort of basic setup of the novel. And then getting all those pieces to come together, so that, and the language, I think, is what really drives you in, again, it reminds me of the way I see musicians work. When I can hear the sound of 1909, then I'm ready to kind of dive in and write the novel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So have you, you're a storyteller, Jess. I would describe you as a storyteller. Yeah. I'm in part, I think I tell stories a lot.
Oh, definitely.
Have you always looked at the world and constructed these tales through how you see it? Do they come to you, or do you just sit down and go at one point, what am I going to do with my life? I guess I'll write. How do you get to this place as as Jess Walter? How do you get to be a writer?
Yeah, I honestly never thought of it as a career when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. Because clearly I was going to play in the NBA. I was going to be a professional basketball player. And so I didn't really know why you'd bother with anything else. But it was a daydream exactly like that. Mm. And I think, just like you don't become a musician without loving music, without feeling it somewhere inside you. We were talking about what happened to my eye when I was 5. I got a stick in my eye, and so you can't go out and play with the other kids for a while. You're stuck inside, and I think that's when I fell in love with books. I remember my mom and my aunts and my mom's friends pulling me on their laps and reading me these books, and the world starts to exist for you that way. You start to see it in stories, and you start to just encounter it that way. And by the time I was in junior high, I was the editor of my school newspaper. I had a family magazine that I edited called Reader's Indigestion. It was like Reader's Digest.
Nice.
and Circulation 3.
Yeah.
And my brother and sister and I, my grandma would give us scratch paper. I try to explain to my kids, we didn't even have paper. We had to use the back of other paper, and we called it scratch paper.
Okay.
Did you find that early on, like in that period, that people were appreciating your writing, and they were like, "Wow, you got a real knack for this thing"?
I think that's the other huge part of it is you get feedback.
Right.
People tell you you're good at this, and being good at something is a pretty quick way to love it.
Yeah.
And I loved basketball even though I wasn't as good at it, but this I knew I was good at, and so I wanted to be a novelist. In my middle school library, I can remember clearly, like, bending down and looking to see where my books would go on the shelves when I was older. And it was almost later that I realized how hard that is, like whatever you dream of, you don't dream of being okay at it, or, you sort of, nobody dreams of being a mid-list author who works at a small university and, has to drive a cab on the weekends. They dream of being Hemingway.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think separating the love for something from the part of the dream that is ambition is sort of this step that you have to go through where you're just, I'm doing this because I love it, because I love to do it. And then once you do that, then I think you're freed up to kind of be more successful at it, if that makes sense.
When did you learn to do that?
I'm still learning. I'm in the middle of book tour now, so it's really hard to keep the ambition at bay.
Yeah.
I got to think, again, the parallels, there's a certain control in writing a novel. You control every part of it. And then you have to give it out to the world and cede all control, including the control of how well it's received, or if it's successful, or any of that stuff. And you've been controlling every little knob and whistle, and all the characters have done exactly what you thought. You've built in subtextual things, and you've created literary allusions to war and peace and to everything else. And now you have to turn it over to people who might read the first 8 pages, and or to someone who might listen to the audiobook and say too many readers, and so that part of it, letting go and putting it out there. I think whatever sort of career path you have, you can look back and say that taught me this lesson, but I think you just have to learn the lesson. Like the path doesn't, you could have success in the beginning and then a middle period. You could have, I spent 7 years sending out short stories, trying to get them taken by journals, and 7 straight years of rejections before I sold my first one. So I felt like that long path up taught me some of that to connect my confidence with my humility, which is, you think they're opposites, but I really think they sort of connect someplace. And then when you do that, when you realize, that you've written something that, bombs, or that no one cares about, or that no one notices, then you go back to why you did it, which is that you love it, and I think living in Spokane has been great for that too, just the grounding of this place. And but yeah, I think I learned that mostly in my 20s. The kind of writer that I wanted to be, because I was a dad so young at 19, I went to work at the newspaper, and so kind of took this other route, and thought, well, those dreams of being a novelist and being on the New York Times book, bestseller list and winning awards, I guess I'll just have to put those aside. But I never quit writing, and it was interesting to put the ambitious dream part aside and then realize that I still wrote every day.
Was it, sorry to interrupt you, Jules. I have so many questions for you, Jess. This is awesome. Do you believe that the tangible execution, because you were a father really young, and then you got a job as a writer.
Right.
And
that
so,
is a newspaper writer, which is very different kind. Yeah.
Okay, different kind. It's probably a lot of output, right? Am I?
I mean, I again, I'll use another musical metaphor. I liken it to, like, you get a job in like you always want to be a musician. You get a job in a bar with a piano that's never been tuned,
Right.
and people come up with requests, and
Yep.
and so yeah, you're playing all the time. You get your chops.
You're like dueling pianos.
Yeah, right. You're just like, but you're not writing your own music, you're
Right.
yeah. And that's kind of what newspapers felt like. But it was a great way to get my chops, but I was still going to have to learn the other kind of writing.
So did you, during that period, was the joy of writing versus just like the tangible execution to pay your bills?
Yeah.
You were kind of maybe flexing that worker mentality, worker bee sort of thing. Do you feel like that informed, you came about success, probably through a lot of like working it out,
Yeah.
dueling piano style writing, and then
Yeah.
you started to become a novelist.
I always think of it as I took the service entrance into literature. I was like, I didn't come in the front banquet doors. I was working as a waiter. And, I was. I was writing newspaper stories, and Ruby Ridge, my first book, was really the path that led to me finding my way back to this daydream. I always had kept my eye open for certain kinds of stories that blew me away when I was young, and one was the big socio-political, economic true crime story, In Cold Blood or Executioner's Song, one of these big meaty news stories that I could write a book about. And so when I was at the newspaper, I was in my, let's say I would have been in my mid-20s covering this shootout in North Idaho between federal agents and a white supremacist family. And I'm like, this white separatist family, this is such a big, rich story. And so I started taking sabbaticals from the newspaper, and I was still writing short stories and sending them out. I had written a novel and a half, and it was in my garage gathering dust. So I was always working at fiction writing, even when I was making a living as a journalist. But I knew there was a book in this case. And at that point, your ambition becomes this attribute that you need. It's almost about like when to turn those dials up and down. And so the ambition it took to, with no agent, I'd never been east of Wyoming. And here I've got to try to sell a book into New York publishing.
Yeah.
And how does that work? Do you, I would imagine at this stage in your writing career, you sign a book deal or you sign to a book deal. But back then you had to write the entirety of the book, right? And then try to get it published.
Because I had all these journalism stories. So my coverage, myself and several other reporters for the Spokesman Review, we were Pulitzer Prize finalists. So that kind of puts you on the map. So there's 1992, there's 3 finalists for the Pulitzer Prize in spot news reporting. The LA Times for the Rodney King riots, Miami Herald for Hurricane Andrew, I believe, and the Spokesman Review for. So already you're kind of on the map. So a literary agent is going to take your letter. So I wrote a book proposal and sent it out, and your first step is to find a literary agent, and they're going to be in some office in New York, and they're going to have writers everywhere, almost all of them in a 9-block radius in Brooklyn, but they sometimes take those of us out here in the sticks. And so I sent out and I found an agent, and he then takes my proposal to publishers, and he and I remember getting letters from it. It'd be like, we're out to these 9 major publishers, and I'm so excited to be working with you, and this is going to be the greatest. And then 3 months later, well, those 9 said no, but we're out to these 11 more publishers. These are really good second-tier publishers. One of them is going to take the book. And then the next one was, well, we're now out to university presses and independent publishers. I'm sure you're so talented, someone's going to take it. And then the last one was, this is my last day at the David Black Agency. Your book proposal was one of the things I really wanted to sell. And then he said one of the nicest things an agent's ever said: I may have failed you, but your talent won't stick with us. So I started just sending the book proposal out myself to publishers. And so found a publisher, HarperCollins, and they agreed to take the book. And so for my first few books, it's really an unlikely story, but I was unagented. I would negotiate my own deals.
No way.
And I had this brilliant negotiating strategy. If they offered 40,000, I would say 80, and then we would settle at 60.
Yeah,
That's how you do it. I've been bargaining cold brew coffees and Fanta.
Walk.
Yeah, no, you double. And
Oh,
then
two cold brews. You hear that, Steve?
Wow.
You need to call my agent. So at that point, do you have the book written, or are you proposing the book?
I had about 20% of it written. I had a lot of my reporting done. And then
Gotcha.
the publisher loved the idea. And then right after I signed was the Oklahoma City bombing.
Oh my God! This is so deep.
And
dude.
so Oklahoma City bombing happens, and one of the motivations was Ruby Ridge. So now my publisher says, we want that book in 4 months. And I've only written a small percentage of it. So I say, of course.
Yeah.
And I get my advance, and I get $25,000. And I immediately I'd covered the trial, but I thought I need the whole trial transcript if I'm going to write a whole book. I'd interviewed already, more than 100 people. I had done 3 years of reporting on the case. So I was ready to write the book. I just hadn't, so I went to get the trial transcript, and they're like, okay, it's $2 a page, and it's 22,000 pages. And I've got a $25,000 advance, and it's going to cost me $24,000.
Yeah.
So I would lug my laptop to the courthouse, and I would sit there and all day read the trial transcript and write chapters and make phone calls. And then I would go home and write at night, because I've got 4 months, and I'm coming from newspapers where you don't ever miss a deadline.
Oh my God.
And I would, to keep myself awake when I was writing, there was a place, one of the first espresso places in Spokane, called Java Junkies, and they had this thing called the Buzz Bomb, which was like 8 shots of espresso and a little bit of goat's milk or something. And
it sounds like a colonic.
yeah, it was. And
Diuretic.
I would go get a Buzz Bomb, and then my kids had a trampoline. My older daughter had a trampoline, and I would do backflips on the trampoline at midnight,
Just to
stay
keep
awake
yourself
to
high
keep
and
writing.
going.
And I just wrote in this like frenzy of, I know this story. I've reported it for 3 years. It's just get it down on the page. And
Wow.
I had a fax machine, and I'd fax the pages in the morning to my editor.
Were you enjoying that process, or were you just fully addicted and in that space and didn't know what else
Yeah.
to do? Like where was your head during that period? Of time?
A little terrified.
I bet.
If I stopped to think about it, I would have such severe imposter syndrome. Like, I don't know how to write a book.
You've been pounding the pavement this whole time.
Right.
Just figuring it out yourself.
And I've wanted to write a book, but I don't necessarily know how. And then, but yeah, the adrenaline drives you. And once there's a thing that happens when I'm writing anything that I'm outside it, and then I'm inside it, and then I'm dreaming it, and I'm hearing the things, and I can almost see what has to come, and I know, and I can step above an entire novel or a whole book and see the shape of it. It needs to start here and then get to the trial, and it doesn't always happen. But when you get into that sort of really deep creative state, like I think any artist, any musician, any sculptor, the time just passes and the material just comes together. Wow. And I nailed that deadline. I wrote an entire book in 4 months, and 25 years later, it's still in print. But it was made into a CBS miniseries. It's been the source for 2 documentaries. It's I think that. I think that now that I'm older, I use less of that artistic adrenaline, but I still feel it when it kicks in. I still recognize it immediately. Like I'm in this thing.
Does it make you sad that you lost some of that artistic adrenaline? Do you wish you could have that, or does that kind of just stress you out thinking about those
it's
times?
probably like any athlete. It's replaced by savvy.
Sure.
It's like, I may not be able to stay up until 4 a.m, but my heart probably also doesn't look like like a spastic frog either.
I was going to ask if there was ever a transition in going from just being this ambitious writer, kind of just pounding the pavement like you were, figuring it all out, to actually now it being a job, and now this is your career and you have these deadlines. Did it change your attitude about the writing process?
Yeah, I think the hardest part for me was right after Ruby Ridge, before I published any novels. So the Ruby Ridge book comes out in 95. Ruby Ridge is in 92. The book comes out in 95. And I've got a little bit of money, but I quit my job. I went in and I still had kids. In fact, I'd had 2 more kids after that. So I've got to support myself. I've got, my older daughter, in 1995 would have been 10, and then my wife and I are starting to have, my second wife and I are starting to have more kids.
You're still in your 20s at this point.
I'm like 11. No, I've just turned 30 when that book comes out, and so I've still got to support kids. So I took some ghostwriting jobs to pay the bills. The first one was Chris Darden, the prosecutor in the O.J. Simpson case, which was great. I don't even think of that as ghostwriting. That was kind of a great, wild thing to write. But then I did a couple of others. I did like Michael Johnson, the Olympic sprinter.
The gold chain.
Yeah.
Spending time with him too.
Yeah. And those, and those are just to pay the bills. You're just coming in, you're a fast writer, you can help someone write their story. But I had this realization that writing has a kind of mystery and ability to explain the world to me that I can only connect with faith. I grew up in a totally non-religious family. Football was what we did on Sundays, but it explains the world. It gives me hope. It's very much like a kind of religion. Yeah. It's more than what I do. It's more than a job. It's the way I see the world. It's what I think it gives me hope to find solutions in writing. And so I realized I can't just do this for money, or I will lose that. I'll lose that sense of it. So I had to go back to the original dream of being a fiction writer and start turning down these really lucrative ghostwriting jobs, bank enough that it looked like my kids might get a year of college, and then turn back to the thing that I loved, which was writing fiction. And then, so my first novel came out in 2001, about 2000, so 5 years after the Ruby Ridge book. And then it's just been, some setbacks, some successes, and then it was really my third novel, Citizen Vince, which won the Edgar Allan Poe Award, which kind of landed me on a more national stage. And then after that, The Zero was a National Book Award finalist, which is, the Academy Awards, and they're saying this is one of the 5 best literary novels of the year. And so that really landed me at a place where now I have the freedom to have it be the thing I love and support my kids and us, So, in that 10 years between my first book, 11 years between my first book and the National Book Award, I would be lying if I pretended like I was just, zen about it all the time. Like you're up in the middle of the night. I don't have enough of a reputation. I'm not being reviewed in the right place. I'm not selling enough. You worry about all those things. But I would kvetch and whine and complain, and then the next day I would go write. And I think even now that's the thing, is writing cures almost whatever worries me.
Are you an everyday writer?
Oh man, I'm an everyday writer. Wow. I took Christmas off last year, but
man, good on you.
But that can also mean writing in my journal, laying on my back on a couch. Can mean reading someone else's book and then go writing for a while. I just like to do it.
Well, it sounds like it's, super cathartic for you, as it should be. And I think, I heard you talking about how the process for writing cures, you can celebrate through your writing. You can get through your grief through your writing. You have all of these phases of yourself through what you write about. And I wonder sometimes if you actually write yourself out of situations that you're in and put yourself, because you can invent whatever you want in your own writing. It's all coming from who you are.
I think you do, but you almost always have to sneak up on yourself. If I write too directly into something I'm feeling, then I get in my own way. But if I put it in someone else's life, and I'm not someone who writes what they call autofiction very often, like really autobiographically. I get really compelled by other stories, by looking out at the world. But then, like anytime you look out at the world, it's healing for you. It's so much better than just like trying to get at, what is this thing that I can't get to the bottom of me? Like we just look deeper and deeper inside, and sometimes if we look outside, there's the answer. But the daily writing part for me, I always think, let's say, you guys are so, when you guys harmonize on this show, by the way, I love it. I'm like, if they call on me to harmonize, I'm going to fake choking. Because whenever I try to sing.
Let's harmonize.
Okay, what are we doing?
No. Whenever my son is incredibly musical, and whenever I try to sing, when he was little, he would say, "Can you not hear that?"
My mom would always pull this when we were driving in the cars. Hey, Alan, who sings this song? I was always, Mom, this is Michael W. Smith. And she said, well, let's keep it that way.
Oh, dang.
Savage, Mom.
Wow. Yeah,
It was either my mom or maybe my sister. I maybe throw my mom under the bus there.
So for someone with almost no musical ability, although I was fourth chair in 7th and 8th grade trumpet.
Come on, man. Were there only 4 chairs?
I think there might have been 5. The 5th kid was waiting on his trumpet. Yeah.
5th kid had asthma.
Yeah, but for someone who has so little musical ability, I think about writing so musically, and to get myself to work every day, I don't think of it as work. I call it what musicians do, play. Like nobody says, I don't want to pick up that guitar. They just grab it, you know? And if I do that, and then I don't force myself to write very many things. That's the other reason it can take 15 years to write a novel, because you can just sort of sit down and play and start riffing and looking for the melodies and the stories that come out. And in that way, I don't think of it as going to work every day. I just think this is what I love to do.
How do you decide, with being an everyday writer, what is going to stick? How do you like get a novel out of this is going to be the thing?
The gods decide that.
Where is that? Where? How?
I mean,
what is that feeling
I still
for you?
think I hit like what about a shortstop would have hit in the 70s. I hit about 245, and about the other 75.5% just doesn't ever become anything. It peters itself out. I can't quite get my arms around the story. I've been writing a short story for the last month about COVID, and I thought, I have this neighbor back there who looks a little like, I think of him as skeezy Leo DiCaprio, because he looks a little like Leonardo DiCaprio, but like after 4 years of meth,
I was like, this just sounds like Leonardo DiCaprio to me.
It could be. But I saw skeezy Leo back there, and I'm like, and sort of like Financial Lives of the Poets, I thought, what if this guy is like being so careful with his family and doing everything the right way, wearing a mask, washing his hands, and then one day he just goes off with skeezy Leo, So I've been trying to get that story, and I'm in the part of the story where you write tedium, where his life is the same. He's doing it the same way every day. To write tedium that's not tedious is really hard, So I'll get so stuck on that part of the story, and then I'll just think, what happens? Then I'm like, oh, I know, and so the breakthrough that will happen will be humming that song, and then I know what the next bar is. And then it's like, you know what? When he goes off with Leo, he thinks Leo must go off and go to a party every day. And he's actually going to see his kid in the park. His wife drops off, and he has to stay 6 feet from his kid because his wife won't let him get. And so to see Leo is actually living the same life he is, but with less money, it's like, oh God, I know this story now. And so you sort of noodle around, and the sound of a story, like I said, is so I called it True Story. And he meets Leo. He's pulling into his driveway because Leo's off his alley, and he's in a nicer house, and Leo lives in the alley. And so he's pulling, and he's like, "Hey, I talked to you. True story, man. I was my car got stolen, and my old lady, And he's like, "Yeah, here's $5." So that's the first time he meets him. So so you're going around humming True Story, trying to figure the end of it, and then you realize, oh, the true story is we're all in this boat. This guy who's standing back there, smoking his vape pen and drinking his energy drinks and drinking a 40 and getting high with his buddies. He can't. His ex won't let him go within 6 feet of his own kid. And the kind of heartbreak of this guy seeing that. And so the process of writing that story of that character getting out of his own head, and me getting out of my own head, they kind of end up mirroring each other, you know? And that's kind of what like a week or a month, and that's, I don't even know if that story's going to go anywhere, you know? I'll send it to magazines and they might take it. They might, I just sold a story recently to Moss magazine in Seattle for $25. So I might
Sweet.
spend a month on it and get
Wait a minute.
$25.
Hold up. We've been trying to get a bio for our website for a minute, and if your going rate is $25,
36
just
on it, dude.
listen. We got 6 more of these Perriers in the fridge.
Well,
Okay.
The novel that I mean, Beautiful Ruins has sold more than almost 2 million copies. So
Really?
So the other end of that,
I'm
but
obviously-
the funny thing is, I don't really spend any more psychic energy on that than I do on
Wow.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
$25
totally.
story. They're all music. They're
That's
all
so
stories.
interesting.
They're all language. So if you hire the guy who writes for Moss, I'll do it for $25. If you try to hire the guy who wrote Beautiful Ruins, it's going to be tens of millions of dollars.
I mean,
on
I
the
just
lawn.
want the text that you sent me to when I asked if you'd be on the show was plenty.
Yeah,
If I can just
that's it.
screen, if you give me permission
Well,
to screenshot that,
and you're welcome to use the Andy Warhol's Factory in the Woods, which
That
is
is
what I
good.
think you guys got going.
That's
there.
it. Yeah, dude. That's,
Quote,
that's
right,
pretty good.
that- we're
Andy
gonna-
Warhol's Factory in the Woods. It's crazy here.
Just
crazy
Just you
here,
feel like
dude.
when you text people that there's like this, people kind of rely on you to like send them incredible prose coming
I
to
hope
them.
not. Although I will
I'm gonna
not
get
use
your number and I'm
I
just gonna
will not
start
use
texting
text
you.
language.
Yeah.
I can't bring myself to.
No.
But there are a few things I end up having to do every eulogy in the family.
For sure.
You know, and I remember my aunt, like when she started getting ill, giving me notes and saying, "Here's what I want you to say." And so I've probably given 15 eulogies.
Oh,
you
wow.
write, you write the obituaries when
Yeah.
your family, when people in the family pass away. You end up, people assume you're going to give the toast. But if whatever things came together to give you the kind of ability and love of something, it seems like a pretty small price to.
Does your family all fully support everything that you do? Read the stuff you do, like it? They think you're weird. What do they think about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes my kids have had trouble, reconciling that dad is like, you go to college and, oh, your dad's my favorite writer. No one wants to hear that, And
Whoa,
my middle daughter started in an English class, and the teacher looked up and said, "Are you Jess Walter's daughter?" And she just got up and went and transferred English classes immediately. It's like, I don't want that pressure when I
man,
turn
yeah.
in a paper.
Yeah.
Wow,
But for the most part, like my son gloriously doesn't read my work. He's like, I'd rather just have you be dad. I don't want to.
You prefer it that way.
No, I mean, I'm fine with it either way. Brooklyn, my oldest daughter, who you know well, Al, is I'll never forget. Growing up, my kids just loved reading, and Brooklyn's always like, I want a story that is, moving and well written, literary, but also just like compels you along. And I want this, and so I'm always giving her books. And she went to. She traveled in the Far East, and she wanted a backpack full of paperbacks, and I considered this my most important job as a parent was to pick out the little paperbacks that she could read and toss aside, as she was in Tibet, and when she was traveling, she was in India, and she got separated from, there were floods, and we didn't hear from her for a few days, and she finally calls, and I'm like, oh my God, are you okay? And she said, Dad, I'm fine. And oh my God, 100 Years of Solitude. And I'm like, I know. And we spend the next 5 minutes talking about 100 Years of Solitude. And then the phone goes dead. And my wife's like, how is she? And I'm like, I don't know, but she loved 100 Years of Solitude.
That's
So,
awesome.
so when I sent her Beautiful Ruins after I finished it, still one of the greatest phone calls, she just called and said, all those years when I was asking for a book, this is the one I wanted.
Wow.
And you're just like, at that moment,
gratifying.
you're just like, you've raised the people who appreciate the thing you're doing, and you've connected with them in that way.
Not only did you sell 2 million copies, but you also pleased your daughter.
I pleased my daughter, which is pretty rare.
Man,
Yeah, that's
I'm gonna
even
start
more
to cry.
important.
That's
I
so
know
cool to hear.
it was this really great moment. And my kids are all so supportive. My Brooklyn's getting her PhD in English, so she's such a reader, and that's what we talk about all the time. And then my middle daughter has a degree in linguistics and comparative literature. And my son is an engineering student and a musician, piano player and singer. He's in the choir at UW. And,
oh, cool.
But even he, even though he's sort of purposely avoided reading my books. He's read a couple of short stories and loves talking about them. So, and then my wife is, you can't be an artist's spouse without taking on a lot of the anxiety and insecurity that they're just going to carry.
Oh, yeah.
And we can carry it in a lot of different ways, but they'll know it's there. I can be like, no, I don't care if I got a bad review. And she's the one person who knows that that I'm just going, "Rah!" Or, no, it'd be great if the book does well, but the only person who knows I'm lying when I'm being, and so for them, I think they shoulder some of that, and that's a real gift. So my wife, Ann, has been terrific about that.
Well, you said that your whole experience of being a writer is all kind of rooted in solitude. You spend a lot of time just by yourself. So I assume that
I invented this whole world we're living in, working at home by
seriously.
yourself, never seeing anybody.
Yeah. Is that play a factor into your family life with you, or do you have a pretty good balance with all that stuff? I assume you have a lot of deadlines and have to continue to write more and more and more.
Again, it's so funny because to look back at a 30-year writing career, there are just all these different periods. Brooklyn used to say, people would say, do you want to be a writer? And she'd say, oh no, that's sitting around in your pajamas crying.
Is that because she saw you doing it?
I think so. I always feel like Brooklyn grew up with a slightly sadder dad because that ambition, that drive, but I'm also like a really playful, I think, and if there's anything that I'm as comfortable in my love and ability for as writing, it's parenthood. Like I think I was born for that. I love being around family and around kids, and being a novelist the last few years meant I was home all the time, and so I do think I was able to keep it in perspective, and I would have to travel for book tours, so I would be in nothing like being a musician, but still I'd have to go to 25 cities or something over 2 months. Toured in Europe a few times, and but those events are smaller, so I'd have to be gone sometimes like that. But for the most part, you're home, and as long as you can disengage from the world, Anne used to describe when I'd be really deep in something, I would come in the house wearing one shoe, set the coffee cup on the table, pour the coffee in the sink, and then just walk back out to my office. I'd just be so into my own world. So you have to be able to come out of that at the end of the day.
You kind of lost most of your youth to having a kid when you were 19, and if you were a writer by trade, and I imagine your life was just skewed in some weird way, that it was just it's all you knew because that was what was going on. But I can imagine it was pretty altered in a different way than most people would be used to.
You can't really see your life from the outside, so it seems as normal as anything. But I do feel many times like a throwback, I've been a dad since I was 19. I'm in the town I was born in. I sometimes feel like I'm from the 1930s,
Yeah.
So, but kind of comfortably so, we can only live the life we're given. And, when maybe it's one of the great things about having one eye from the time you're 5 is you don't sit around imagining what that other eye would see. You just look out of the one you have.
Yeah.
So.
I'd like to circle back, if it's okay with you, Jess, to the Ruby Ridge book and experience. I heard about your writing through a bunch of different angles, through Brooklyn, through Dan Spalding, but then also I'm a avid stay up later than my wife and like just cram story documentaries. And I happened upon Ruby Ridge and was, first of all, fascinated when Jess Walter popped up in the documentary. I think it was the American Experience documentary that's out. You're writing for the Spokesman Review at this point. You're young. You're in your mid-20s. This event occurs over a span of about 2 years, right?
Well, the case itself, we didn't really know about it. I mean, but by the time it bubbles up at the newspaper, the standoff is happening. The shootout's happening.
Yeah, okay.
It's not like we're out there saying, which alcohol, tobacco, and firearm informants are infiltrating which cells of white separatists.
Right, and so this bubbles to the surface, the standoff happens, and you go out and cover. Are you there on the ground, on foot? Like, how does it, as an investigative journalist, what are are you cold calling people? And as well, once you get the story, if you've downloaded all this information over time, and you go, I want to write a book about this. Well, I've always been curious about these stories because do you have to get the rights signed away by the families? If you go write a book about Oprah, you have to get the rights to the book.
Yeah. Well, this was, it works differently every time, of course. This was not the sort of book that, this was not Randy Weaver's story. This was not the FBI story. This was down the middle, tell every side of the story. This was a journalistic story. So I approached it as a journalist.
Yeah.
Getting on the story itself was really hard because I was not the top of the food chain at the newspaper. I was a scrappy 20-something night cops reporter with his daughter at home, living in a $165 a month apartment in Brown's Addition. I checked out a company car once and didn't return it for 4 months because I didn't have any other wheels. I was so poor, and so I'm trying to get on this story. This huge story breaks. We have these amazing reporters who are on it. I'm stuck in the office, and it's happening in North Idaho. And it was about day 3 when I thought found out the Weaver family was from Iowa. So I just started burning up the phone. Call every library in Iowa, get every phone book, get every Weaver, call every Weaver until you find a relative. And then I did that, and I found a cousin who told me, Vicky Weaver, the wife, her family's driving out there. Oh, do you have their number? So then I call them. So I do an interview with some people in Iowa, in Spokane, as they're leaving for Idaho. I go to my editors. I say, here's all this information on the family. Write it up. It goes in a story. And then they're like, all right, go up to Idaho.
They gave you the lead.
So I head up to Idaho. I meet the family. That sort of gives me an in. In the meantime, I'm also working federal sources. The great thing about being a reporter is you can be a good writer, you can be a good researcher, but it's just curiosity. It's just, what will you do to find out more information about something?
But aren't there a lot of people that are like, no, don't talk to us. We don't
how are you received when you are making those cold calls?
Sometimes, and I always think I'm the conduit for the story. I'm trying to get your story out there. I say, look, the FBI is saying Randy Weaver is a white supremacist, and she's like, he was in the Army. They're good Iowa folk. He worked at a John Deere factory. They have kids up there. They're a little religious and weird, but And so you get that side of the story, and then you go to the FBI, and and you just sort of bounce back and forth and get everybody's version of the story. And if you do your job right, you're just sort of sort of getting the facts out there, getting the word.
It takes a very diplomatic approach.
Yeah, but it also just takes curiosity. I really was curious, how do you go from being this all-American Iowa family to shaving your head and putting on a swastika on a mountaintop in Idaho? What are the steps that happens? How, and from the other vantage, how does the FBI and the Marshal Service and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, end up in this place where these mistakes mean that they're shooting civilians? It's just tracing those steps and finding out the human decisions that lead to them, and that's what I'm so fascinated by, and the story that I want to tell, because I had gotten to know Vicky Weaver's family, when the standoff ended, and I had been so I'm up there reporting as all the things are happening. But I said, when it's over, I'd sure love to talk to the girls. And so every reporter, Time and Newsweek and the New York Times and ABC, NBC, dozens of reporters are up at Ruby Ridge, and the next morning I'm the only one who interviews the Weaver girls as they're leaving. And
as they're leaving, the day they left
the day
compound.
they leave the cabin to go back to Iowa with their relatives, I interview them and I describe for the first time what it was like inside that cabin. And that was the side of the story that hadn't come out. And from then on, I felt like this is my story. I'm just going to keep chasing it. So from the trial, I flew to Iowa and researched the Weavers' backgrounds, how they arrived there. I followed up with all the different federal agents. It's really just curiosity. You just want to get the next piece of the story until you can put it all together.
What were those girls like when you interviewed them in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, that was still one of the most harrowing interviews. They were furious. They had their from their vantage, they don't think our parents have put us in this situation. From their vantage, their brother was shot in the back, their mother was shot in the head as she held their, it's horrific. They huddled in a cabin with their dead mother for 9 days, assuming they were going to be shot by the federal agents. It was, and the FBI has been saying these are white supremacists who, they've been saying this sort of company line. And by that time, even the federal agents knew that they had made terrible mistakes. Mm-hmm. And then it was tracing how did those mistakes come about. And it isn't usually, there are always two steps to those stories. The first is the mistake and the second is the cover-up. And it's tracing those places that the cover-up occurred. And so that was the story I wanted to tell. How did these two tragic things happen? How does an all-American family end up with these abhorrent beliefs that lead them to be paranoid and conspiracy theory driven? And then how does the government end up, treating a family like criminals and, and killing them? And those two stories, you just hew to as much of the truth as you can get to in a story like that.
Was there an overwhelming ingredient that you believe both of those parties were susceptible to that kind of led them to that place? Is it
That's a great question.
Fortune telling? Is it throwing out enough belief?
I mean, the book was originally called Every Knee Shall Bow,
right?
Because of a sign the Weavers had at their house, Every Knee Shall Bow to Yahshua Messiah. But it was really both sides were saying it was a kind of stubbornness, a kind of tribal stubbornness that in the 25 years since that book has only gotten worse. We are so stubborn and tribal now, and we don't want information. We don't want anything that's going to change the way we think. All we want is to be confirmed in what we already believe, and that's the Weavers, went down this road of conspiracy thinking that a lot of Americans are going down now that leads them, to believe that racism is the answer. The government went down this other road that in which they refuse to see beyond their definition of who follows these beliefs, and the stubbornness on both sides, the inability to just stop and treat this like human beings, and it probably leads to a lot of tragedies like that.
Do you see that overwhelming? Because what was so interesting about diving into Ruby Ridge, reading your book, was how many things during that 10-year span of the Ruby Ridge tragedy, what in your book you notified led to, or at least was connected to
Oklahoma City
as well as Waco.
Waco and Ruby Ridge were really the triggers for Timothy McVeigh and for the last time until now that the radical right wing has been as fired up and instigated. It was during that period.
And but prior to this, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was a situation that happened with a alt-right neo-Nazi group robbing banks up the West Coast.
Order. Yeah.
And this was what at least spawned this overwhelming sense in trying to rid our country of that.
Yeah, there has always been this this outlying group of racist criminals like the Order. But yeah, in the 1980s, the Order, inspired by groups like the Aryan Nations in Hayden Lake, set out to commit robberies and start a war between the races. They're always trying to start a war between the races. And,
Right.
And thankfully they're, the stupidity of that project always fails out from under them. But and so that the Weavers moved to Idaho at a time when investigating those groups was at such a premium that they fell into the investigation. But then it was on the fringe. After Waco and Ruby Ridge, you had congressmen and women in Idaho and other places saying the government's out of control and they're murdering civilians and it really pushed a lot of those groups into the mainstream. The Michigan militia, one of those a group much like the one that's now accused of planning to kidnap the Michigan governor, really came up during that period. But what happened was after Oklahoma City, when Americans saw that a lot of these groups wanted war, and then they lost a lot of the appeal, the mainstream appeal. They went back into the fringe. Now, when you have a president who says openly racist things and encourages the Boogaloo Boys or the Proud Boys, that now they're back out in the mainstream again. And no matter what you think, no matter who you vote for, whether you're a R or a D or a blue or a red, to have groups that propose racism and violence, that should be out of the political mainstream. Neither party should allow that sort of thought to be that and conspiracy thinking. So, I feel like, if we can't draw the line at violence and conspiracy thinking, then we don't have a whole lot in common. If political parties can say, yeah, let's toss out violence, including rioting. I'm so supportive of the cause of Black Lives Matters, but I don't think any politician should say, well, yeah, it's good to blow stuff up or set fires or anything. I think that's a pretty safe place to say, I believe very much in the cause of racial justice, and that that law enforcement needs to act differently. But I also don't think we should loot stores.
Right.
I don't think that it's too far to go.
Unless it's a Banana Republic, because they got some polos, Jess, that you and I could fit right into.
But you have to do that seasonally. You do not want to loot a Banana Republic in the summer.
No, their winter line is lame. So you interviewed a lot of federal agents for Every Knee Shall Bow, and as a journalist, you had spoke about like I was hungry and I had to go find that story. It is. I've never interviewed a federal agent, and so I don't know, and I'm assuming this, but. Do they have to go out and find jobs kind of like that as well? In my study of Waco and of Ruby Ridge, there's these federal agents, just like, I have to do the same thing. I have to go out and I have to be like, okay, I'm going to sell you this song. It's going to be the best song you've ever heard, and it's going to make me millions. And federal agents must have that same capacity to go, I'm going to find the case. I'm going to solve the story. Do they go out and create that tension?
No, they're just regular guys. It's so funny. Cops and FBI agents, when you interview them on the job, they're like, at 0400, the perpetrator arrived at the premises. And then when you see them in the bar, they're like, the mope shows up at 4. He's had 4 beers. I'm like, what the fuck? You just don't want to interview
turn
them
into
on
Dead
the job.
Danza.
Yeah, they're just guys. A lot of them are ex-military. Sometimes they have a sense of doing those things, but they're really just doing the job,
Right.
And interviewing those guys, I'll never forget Dave Hunt, who was a marshal in Idaho, whose job it was to get Randy Weaver out. And he's from Idaho. He's not some Washington, D.C. guy. He's like, I know these guys. I know what they're afraid of. Half the time I agree with them. I don't want to pay taxes either, but I do.
Yeah.
So I drive up there and I say, Randy, look, this is going to get out of hand. Just come down. You and your kids, just come down. And he's like, Bathsheba hath commanded me that I shall not, and he's like, come on, and just the fatigue with which he saw. I mean, he's watching that fuse, and he's like, I can't stop this, And I always found him one of the most poignant people because there was nothing he could do. He couldn't. He'd say, "Look, you can drive down yourself." Of course, you'd say that. I'll send the sheriff up. He's not a sheriff elected according to posse comitatus law or whatever. It's like when you're dealing with. And I remember some of that as a reporter. I remember going up and interviewing a white separatist family, and the son had a rifle pointed like this the whole time, and the dad and I had driven up in that company car that I checked out and never returned, and I had a short haircut because at the time my dad was cutting my hair, and he only did military and flat top. Those are your two choices.
Or the combination.
Right, or the combination. And so he's like, well, I know you're a federal agent. I saw your car. And I said, no, it's a company car from the newspaper. Oh, yeah, that you think you couldn't get fake newspaper? I said, I'll show you the registration.
Let me be honest, dude. This is a rental. I just haven't.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's
This
like,
is a
well,
Malibu.
what about your haircut? And I'm like, well, my dad cuts my hair. Oh, yeah,
wow,
sure.
weird.
It's a Chevy Blaze, bro.
And I just could not. It was a Ford Tempo. I could not convince him because everything I said was only proof that I was clearly a federal agent. And that kind of conspiracy thing and that not being open. If we don't have the sort of openness, then we're doomed.
Yeah. Wow. I had another question pop up and it's completely left my gaze. Take over.
That's
Jules.
okay.
Jump in.
You said that the whole thing was curiosity based for you, and that you were just like fascinated by all this stuff, and you were able to take this diplomatic approach to figuring out of it. And at the same time, there must have been experiences like what you just talked about that were, in fact, really scary for you to be a part of, and also was after the fact of writing the book. Wasn't there like this intense amount of responsibility that you felt to telling the truth, and then did you get like death threats, or like I just assume that like something like that kind of thing happens with this kind of story?
I got some threats. I showed up on one FBI list. When you get to know, I got to know like there were these skinheads up there that I would interview, and it was really tense up there. I remember there were times there was a black reporter named Adrian from the Boston Globe who was up there, and he and I were walking back from this rural bar, the Deep Creek Inn, and we're walking back, and there's these skinheads on the road, and I'm walking next to one of the few black people in Boundary County, Idaho at that moment, and he's like, "Don't leave me," and I said, "I'm not going to leave you," and those guys walked by and we're like, "Hey," and they're like, "Hey," and then we just sort of go around and we're like, both of us were just like, "Oh," that was sort of scary, and then the night that they announced Vicki Weaver had been killed, and many of the protesters were screaming, "This means war," and you could see. And if you looked in the woods, you could see FBI agents with their rifles trained on this roadblock, and you're like, this is going to erupt. And so there were times like that.
Oh my God.
Usually, like a reporter, I really do take my job pretty seriously when I was a reporter, of just taking the information, and being Switzerland, being as neutral as you can. I did, there were a couple times when I was a little nervous, but I was telling you about these skinheads. There's these skinheads from Las Vegas, and I finally came up with a question about skinheads that they would always be, how did you know? I would say, when did your dad leave? Because almost all of them were looking for some paternal, some, there was this one group that was, I always thought of them as the friendliest skinheads, and I would say, and they're like, yeah, we're in a band, we play speed metal, we used to play this, we used to be more folky, kind of like Peter, Paul, and Mary, but racist.
And we got fucking intense.
Yeah. And I just found them so naive, so bloody stupid. And they called me once, a black van just drove by our house. If we get killed, you need to take our story out. Oh, I guess it's just a van, and I just found them so naive and simple and lacking information. And again, because they're closed, they're not ever going to get that information. They're going to get the little bit that they allow in.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't too scared of those guys finding my house.
Sure.
They also weren't very bright.
But you're still taking. Sorry, Alan. You're still taking this like neutral stance about extreme people.
Yeah,
who are
totally.
Who can be like, you didn't say that this thing was the way that I think it is. So like that's what would scare me. Just that like, yes, of course you're telling a story from just like this level playing field.
Yeah.
Like I'm not taking any sides here. But
Well,
like,
and I'm not a reporter now. I haven't been for years. But we live in a country where the president of the United States calls us the enemy of the people, and it is a dicey time. And newspapers are, they're dying because of the lack of advertising. So there are fewer reporters, stretched thinner, loathed by 40% of the country, not trusted by so many people. And I find it heartbreaking. They are. It's a pretty thankless job. It doesn't pay well. You do it out of that love of writing and of storytelling we talked about. But there's another love the reporter has to have, which is that the writing you do will lead to a kind of betterment and justice. You write about Ruby Ridge so that Ruby Ridge doesn't happen again, so that people can see those steps that led to this thing. And of course it happens again. One of the hard things about being a reporter is feeling like you're just sort of chronicling these things, that nothing you do changes anything. But I would say your physical safety was, my 85th concern most days. I wrote about guys in the witness protection program and got to know some mafia members in Spokane. And because there was a murder committed in Spokane that I covered, and it turned out it was a New Jersey mafia guy connected to the Lucchese crime family, the Sopranos family,
No way.
essentially, who had been sent here. And so that got me into this whole thing about how many witness protection guys are there, and then tracking them down and interviewing them. And there was one time when one of them followed me in his car that I was like, you got to be careful with your curiosity sometimes, mister. But
You talked just a second ago about neutrality in journalism, and as early into my 30s, I'm just now starting to care about the world that I'm raising a child within.
Yeah.
And the neutrality in journalism, now granted, biasm's going to happen in human storytelling regardless, because we inform ourselves through the past, and our future is kind of told in that regard. But neutrality seems to be slowly leaving journalism. It seems to me, and it's I think probably because of a lot of different integers. You have to sell papers, clickbait, advertisement needs.
I mean, the real thing is not necessarily the market. The market doesn't drive it because people want sensational stuff. It drives it because people want to be reaffirmed what they already think.
Interesting.
Fox News is so big because the people on it don't want CNN to pop their bubble. They don't want MSNBC to pop their bubble. They want to live in that bubble. MSNBC, the same thing. I don't want to. You want to be reaffirmed in what you already know. And it's funny writing a novel set in 1909, as I did with my new one, because the newspapers were the same way. There were 4 daily newspapers in Spokane, and you could get the labor progressive newspaper. You could get the establishment newspapers that would just tell you what the business interests wanted you to know. It was almost the journalism really evolved into a much more civic-minded thing. And because that's the period that I was a journalist, that's what I cling to. There are still amazing journalists and reporters out there. There is not a great deal of bias within, except in what we choose. If you choose something down the middle, like the New York Times or the Washington Post or even the Wall Street Journal, which has a very right-wing editorial page, but covers the news really straightforward. I think you're going to I think TV news is harder because it's always had to be a little flashier.
Yeah.
I think CNN has gotten so tired of Trump's lies that now they just say the president's lying, and if you're a Trump supporter, that doesn't seem very balanced or neutral. It seems, but I think these are unusual times to try to be that kind of reporter when disinformation is just everywhere.
Yeah.
But we have to be discerning, and we have to open ourselves to all different kinds of things and be willing to admit we're wrong.
Yeah.
And nobody likes to do that, unfortunately.
You are younger father, and you're seeing this evolution happen with the age of the internet.
Yeah.
Talked about misinformation. I'm curious, going back in time and learning about Cold Millions, your new book, what parallels did you see? You talked about the sensationalized newspapers, just 4 of them in the Spokane area was only 100,000 people.
Yeah.
What other parallels were existing in that universe that you studied about? Because it's kind of fact, or it's kind of fiction, it's kind of nonfiction, right?
Yeah, it's. It really is a novel, but I based it on these events that really happened, these free speech riots in 1909. And as I said, the thing that drew me first was the parallel of income inequality. We have the billionaires got $2.1 trillion richer during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Now, the rest of the economy is suffering. We all know restaurant owners, and how did they get $2.1 billion richer? Because everything is right now geared toward the finance side. The simple aspect of housing. Now, if you own a home, you want the value to go up. And middle-class people, their entire wealth is often tied up in that home. It's become not just a shelter, a place you live, but the place that the instrument for your financial well-being. And so when that happens, what's going to happen to homelessness? When we make every home a commodity that generates wealth, when we take that commodity and we chop it up and we allow finance people to sell it as another kind of financial instrument, which caused the financial crisis of 2008, what's going to happen to homelessness? Why are we surprised to go downtown and see people sleeping on sleeping bags? We've built this into these systems that we've created, and you look at 1909, and this is when the system is being built. This is when. So the 2 brothers in my story are named Ryan, and Gig. Gregory, his nickname's Gig. And I loved thinking about the gig economy and imagining a guy hopping a train in 1909, showing up in Spokane. If you arrived in Spokane on that train in 1909, you'd be one of thousands of hobos, tramps looking for work. All of the mining and timber in Montana and Idaho, all of the agriculture in central and southern Washington, the hobos came here. 7 rail lines coming in, Tramp Central Station. And those hobos want a job. So up and down Stevens Street, there were 20 to 40 job agencies, and you went there and it cost $1 and they would send you to a job. Now you go out to that job, and these unions at the time are fighting for rights for workers. They're fighting for a 6-hour workday, not 5, because it was a 7-hour workday. They're fighting for a 10-hour workday, or a 6-day work week, a 10-hour workday, not 8, but instead of working 12 or 14, they're fighting for the right that if you cut your foot off in a baler, they don't just throw you out. They have to help you. They're fighting for basic, health and welfare. And we're in a system that is so geared toward finance that billionaires could make $2 trillion during a pandemic, that they could chop up our mortgage and make money on that, but we aren't going to take care of the people at the most basic level with their basic needs. So to write about hobos on a train going to these job sharks to get a job is in my way it's an allegory for, an Uber driver. He's gonna drive 7 days a week if he needs the money. He's putting his own car up. If he wrecks his car, that's not Uber that pays for it. He pays for it. He pays his own insurance. We are very much in danger of putting ourselves in that gilded economy that we had in 1909 that led to the Great Depression, to 1/4 of people being out of work. Capitalism works beautifully if it's regulated. If it's not, it will always do this. The wealth will, and since the 1980s, we've cut regulations so much. So rather than write an economic treatise on any of that, I write a novel, and then hopefully the next time you see a homeless person, you think of my characters Ryan Gig, and you think of someone battling just to make a go of it. What it's like to be so close to the edge that you could lose everything. Your car breaks down, you call someone, you get a ride. If the guy who lives in the alley behind me, if his car breaks down, he can't get to work, he loses his job, everything falls apart. To be that close to the edge. And so, I do think we're living in times in which we have to really remember to bring up the poorest and the least fortunate, or we'll find ourselves there.
That's such a wonderful sentiment, and I think an excellent way to wrap up.
I was told there'd be ping pong.
There's going to be ping pong. We're going to do some conversations. We just put up the table today. Jess, you are fascinating, and I feel like we don't. We haven't. We're going to keep bugging you. We know you're super busy,
I'm going to have my son teach me to sing, and then I'm going to carry
Don't you want to just do one song before you leave?
I'm going to carry some bass line that's going to have you guys thinking, this is amazing.
I can't wait. We'll maybe rehearse.
I'm a few steps away.
Okay, and we're gonna put a basketball court down here by the water to bring you and your son out.
I won't play.
I want to see that jump shot.
I hate to do that to your 30-something-year-old confidence, to lose to a small one-eyed old guy.
I don't have that much confidence, but I would throw my ring in the.
I've got range. I could probably hit my court in Peaceful Valley from here. That's
Really?
The kind of range I've got.
See, my dad always had a running joke. He would bank. He would chuck it from half court, bank it in. He was classic. Yeah. And he would always go, shit, I missed it so far, I made it.
That feels like that should be a philosophy of some.
Yep, it is. I do that quite often with everything in my life. But thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. It was so fun.
Where can people just buy the new book on the 27th?
Yeah,
it's coming out.
They'll have some signed copies at Auntie's. I have a website, jesswalter.com.
Cool.
Made a really cool 5-minute Ken Burns style film about Spokane in 1909 with some of the locations from the novel. So you should watch that.
Where can they find that?
It's also it'll be on my website. I won't put it up until the novel comes out because I'm using it at some of the events. But they can find that there. And I'll be out. I have these Zoom events, which are like real events but stupider. So I have all kinds of.
Shout out to Zoom.
I have all sorts of readings and events in the next few weeks, and then hopefully they'll like it.
I can't wait to digest all your stuff, man. I'm super pumped to read it now. Just knowing you, it's going to be.
I feel like I should go on hiatus, maybe like a 3-month hiatus, just to read all of my oeuvre, and then start up again.
Yeah, let's do another one. Seriously,
I'm in
for sure.
All right, Jess Walter, everybody. Thank you,
Thanks.
Jess.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, man.
Legend.
Sweet.
All right. Oh, boo-boo, did you just make it to the end of the video? Yes, you did. Do you want to see more videos just like this one? Do you?
Well, then head over to patreon.com/Live at the Lodge, where you can support the How Good's of this podcast, as well as the entire Live at the Lodge family.
Yep. Yeah, you're going to get exclusive merch, personalized shout-out videos. Me and Jules, we're going to show up at your house and baptize your nephew, huh? Check it out, patreon.com/Live at the Lodge.